Okay, welcome to this webinar. It is the first of a cycle about how to develop and write the dissertation chapters. Today, I will present you the chapter that most people suggest being written after the other chapters. You may think, wait a minute, why are you then beginning this series of webinars by focusing on chapter 1? As you will see soon, because you must have at least a preliminary version of chapter 1 in order to make valid and coherent decisions while developing your dissertation. The initial chapter is focused on pivotal elements of the study like problem, purpose, research questions, theories, and research design. And if you want to develop a coherent dissertation or thesis, you need to check those elements constantly. So the sensible alternative is to have all of them in the same place. Yes, in chapter 1, and it will be the lighthouse of the process. And of course, please remember that you can write down any question that you want to ask. You can do it while the webinar is going on, or you can wait till the question and answer time at the end of the presentation. So let's continue. Please feel free to write your questions on the chat box. Okay. Because of what I have said is why I wrote this quote that illustrates the role of the initial chapter. You will face many decisions throughout the process of developing your study, and every time you will need to look at chapter 1 to check if your decisions are valid, coherent, and relevant. The elements included in the chapter are in fact the framework into which the results of your decisions must fit. And this is today's agenda. First, you will see what a dissertation is. Second, what its parts usually are. And third, I will dissect chapter 1 for you. The goal is that you have a guiding picture of a dissertation and its initial chapter. Many people write dissertation. Oh, yes, of course. Sorry. I'm going to, please remember, Adrian, remember me to, or remind me in order to put them at the end. I forgot that. Thank you, Adrian. Of course, you can not only have the slides right now, but also you will have the link to the recording. But just reminding me that, Adrian. Okay, many people write dissertations, and because of that, we may assume that everybody knows what it is. However, that is not the case. Students and professors may have different ideas about not only the conceptual view of that product, but also about what should be done in it. That's why the first part of this webinar will be devoted to talk about what a dissertation is expected to be, so you can have a reference framework when we dissect each chapter. Wait a minute. Okay. Let's begin discussing what a dissertation is not, so you can have a picture of the path you shouldn't go through. If you reflect upon what is behind the 4 characteristics presented in the slide, you may realize that a dissertation is by no means a sloppy product. It doesn't have superficial analysis, incoherent parts, outdated ideas, or worthless focus. So, what is a dissertation? Well, according to the characteristics mentioned in this slide, a dissertation is essentially an innovative, critical, coherent, valid, and meaningful piece of work. Therefore, a dissertation can be defined in this way. Please pay attention to the words in bold type and try to reflect upon what they have in common. The words have a relationship based on reflection and consistency, and that relationship is the essence of a dissertation. In other words, a dissertation is built upon reflective thinking to create a consistent, informative, and functional piece of information. And because of that, a dissertation provides an accurate reflection of its author. It tells readers how their mind works, how they deal with uncertainty, and how well they transmit a message that is so important to them and their field of study that they spent many years to develop it. A dissertation illustrates a research process intended to fill up a gap of information that is considered significant. In order to do that, the researcher must provide valid, consistent, and supported information clearly enough presented and discussed to convince readers that it can impact the related context significantly. That goal is achieved by organizing the information in such a way that the whole process can be visualized and evaluated easily. Let's see how dissertations are organized. The most common structure of a dissertation is the one presented in the slide, which is usually presented in 5 chapters. However, your university or advisor may require a different structure, and therefore you need to check the specific approach they ask for. In this cycle of webinars, I'll follow the usual structure of 5 chapters, and today I will focus on chapter 1. The complexity of the information gathered, analyzed, discussed, and written in a dissertation can produce that you get lost, misled, or confused more than once. To avoid that, you need to be able to find the pivotal elements of your study easily and consistently expressed. Luckily, all the guiding information can be coherently together. Where else than in chapter 1? There you find what you think should be the study. The theoretical and research framework within it should be study. What you expect to achieve, what you have to answer or test, and how you will look for that answer or do that test. And therefore, you can access those beacons of your work easily whenever you have to make a decision or check its validity and appropriateness. So chapter 1 becomes your lighthouse when you are sailing into troubled waters. As I said before, some people suggest that you write chapter 1 after writing other parts of the dissertation. In my opinion, that applies only to the dissertation introduction that must match its conclusion. But the researcher should have a guide to follow whenever they have to make a decision to develop the study. For example, when choosing or building the instruments to gather data, you have to check if they are appropriate to the research question such data will answer. Consequently, it is necessary to look at chapter 1 and check the appropriateness of the decision made about the instrument. In summary, A preliminary version of chapter 1 has to be written at the beginning of the research process to function as the guide to develop the study. The purpose of chapter 1 is then to provide the essential information of the dissertation, and that makes it a very important part of your dissertation, of any dissertation. It presents the elements that provide the framework into which you develop your study. This slide, this table, summarizes both the goals of chapter 1 and what defines its importance. As you can see, chapter 1 presents a general but precise look of what the dissertation is about and why it is conceived in that way. This characteristic makes it the part of the dissertation to which you go back every time you have to choose, evaluate, and review what you are doing. Therefore, its importance is tied to the elements that are included in it, since it tells what intrigues you as a researcher, what you want to do in relation to that situation, on what grounds you build your point of view, what you want to answer, and how you intend to get those answers. Then, chapter 1 basically says where you are, where you want to go, how you will move from one point to the other, and why you do the journey. Adrian says, so write up chapter 1 for our own use anyway. Yes. The working version doesn't have to be shared with anyone else unless we feel ready to do so, or unless your advisor asks for it. But you need to have even a personal version of chapter 1. So whenever you have to make decision, whenever you say, oh, I need to read this, and they say, wait a minute, should I have to read this article? It is in what way it is related to my problem, my purpose, my research question, my theoretical framework. And then you go to your version of chapter 1, check it if it is necessary that you read it or not. And that will save you a lot of time and a lot of effort, okay? All right. Due to its purpose, chapter 1 usually includes the elements that will be presented in the next slide. This one. Although it depends on each university requirements, this is the information usually included in chapter 1. It is not necessarily presented as headings, but they are included in the text at least. Welcome, Christy. So, in this slide, you find a definition for each element, and that allows you to infer the nature of chapter 1 and the reason why it can be considered the lighthouse of a dissertation. Okay, now let's have a look at each one of those elements so you can have guidelines to develop them. So don't worry about the slides because I'm going to upload it under handouts tab when I finish the presentation. Okay. Let's begin by the background. The background of the study establishes the context of the research. This section explains why the particular research topic is important and essential to understanding the main aspects of your study. Usually, the background is the first section of a dissertation and identifies the gap of information your study intends to fill up, justify the need for conducting the study, and summarizes what the study aims to achieve. Most students have difficulties to differentiate background and literature review. The two terms are often used interchangeably. However, they have clearly defined roles. The former, in other words, the background, provides an overview of the context from which the problem emerges, and it does it concisely by means of outlining the historical developments in the literature that led to the current topic. The literature review, on the other hand, provides detailed and deeper information about all the variables involved in the research problem, as you will see in the next webinar when we talk about when we dissect chapter 2. So the background section focuses on answering this question: what is known about the broad topic? What are the gaps or missing links that need to be addressed? What is the significance of addressing those gaps? And what are the rationale and hypotheses of your study? As you see in the definition of the term, the problem statement is a description. However, a description may be done in many different ways. To be effective, a description must provide the information needed to achieve the goal to which that description is related. In the case of the research problem, the description must make the intriguing situation so clear that other elements of the research process, like the research question and the methodology, can be inferred from it. Therefore, a problem statement should state information about the context into which the problem emerges, what needs to be studied, and the reasons to do it. How to provide such information is something to reflect upon, since it should be done in such a way that readers, and especially other researchers, can understand it precisely and evaluate it appropriately. That goal is achieved if you write a statement with these characteristics. And pay attention. Brevity, to assure that readers do not get lost in words and that you can easily reread it whenever you have to make decisions in relation to other elements of the research. Then, an attention-grabbing sentence to interest the reader to continue reading, especially if that sentence refers to the importance of the research. A background information to set the foundation to convince readers that your research is based on strong basis and can be useful. Specific aspects of the intriguing situation you are going to study to set the framework within which you will work, define the gap of information your study intends to fill, and be evaluated. All that information is usually done in not more than 2 paragraphs to comply with the rule of short, simple, and straightforward. However, the exact number of paragraphs depends on the requirements established by the university or the advisor. And you may ask, that's impossible to write a short problem statement in just 2 or a definite number of paragraphs? No, not at all. It's not impossible. It may be difficult, perhaps, but if you have good guidelines to do that, there will not be a problem with that. Check my last year webinar about writing a problem statement to know how to do it, and you will have very good guidelines in order to fulfill that goal. Now, the purpose of the study is the element that makes clear what the ending point of the journey is, what you intend to find out or do in the study. It defines the goal to achieve as a result of doing the study. It derives from the problem, since the latter indicates what the area of concern is, and the purpose expresses what you want to do in order to address that area. Therefore, it has to be defined clearly. Usually, a study may intend to, it could be identify variables, relationships, or concepts that are not clear in the target problematic situation. In other words, the situation has not been studied thoroughly, and your purpose is to do that. Or describe the characteristics of the target problematic situation because they are well known. So the situation is well known, but you want to point out exactly what the characteristics are. Or you may want to explain functions, processes, and relationships within the problematic situation. Or perhaps predict behaviors, functions, developments, or solutions to the target situation. Let me ask you something. Is so far everything clear? No questions so far? I mean, I'm just checking that you are there, okay? Okay. Chapter 1 may include a theoretical framework, a conceptual one, or both. That depends on the requirements established by your university or advisor. Let's first check a little what is the difference between theoretical framework and conceptual framework. So you can have a better picture of what I'm going to talk about. A theoretical framework refers to the explanation, in other words, theories, models, approaches, etc. You choose to study the research problem and achieve the purpose of your research. It evolves from the critical analysis of the literature and has a wide application beyond the research problem and context. On the other hand, a conceptual framework is the result of bringing together a set of related concepts to understand, explain, or predict the research problem. It is created by you to have a synthesis of the main relevant concepts to your research, and it is limited to either the specific research problem or the context. But you may wonder, what's the difference between the theoretical framework of Chapter 1 and the literature review of Chapter 2, as you did when talking about background? Well, it is basically a matter of depth. The theoretical framework in Chapter 1 gives a general picture of what theories are relevant to your study and how they fit together. In that sense, it is a concise discussion. The literature review, on the other hand, is a deep discussion of all the theoretical elements upon which your research is based, the relationships between them, and even other points of view that challenge them. So the difference in purpose and depth is what is behind the recommendation about citation that is included in the slide. The significance of your study may be presented as a separate section or included in another section like the background. The aim is to make clear the reason why the identified gap of information must be filled up. You may have an interesting research problem, but it may not be important to be studied due to its little possible impact in the field of study or lack of benefits for a specific audience, or etc. Therefore, it is essential that you discuss how your study will contribute to fill up the identified gap of information and what benefits that will imply. The last question of this slide emphasizes why the significance of the study must be pointed out. You can be told, interesting and well conceived. So what? What would it be good for? Adrian says, a theoretical framework also impacts our choices of methodology, research design, data analysis, and interpretation of results. No? Yes. And that's why we have to conceive chapter 1 as the guideline of our study, because according to the theory that you have chosen to study the problem, you have to choose the appropriate methodology that follow that theory. For instance, if you choose positive theoretical and philosophical paradigm, then your methodology have to be quantitative, or perhaps mixed method research. If your theory is tied to a more qualitative view, a more sociological and connected point of view, a paradigm, then you have to look to develop a qualitative study. So, as I said before, and I have repeated, chapter 1 is where you find all the criteria in order to make decisions on the rest of the study. And Adrian says, so our theoretical framework is the pair of color filter lenses that we put on as we make sense of our data. Of course, how can you interpret your data? According to your belief, according to how you conceive the problem, how you conceive the context into which the problem is. If you believe in a positive way of conceiving reality, it means that reality is independent of people or of all the items or living things that are included into the problem. Therefore, you have to gather quantitative data and also interpret it in terms of means, in terms of mathematical and statistical elements, because for you, reality is independent of the context. If you, on the other hand, if you think that participants in a situation affect the way in which the problem develops and is in fact a cause of changes, then you have to interpret the gathered data in those terms. You have to take into account how you as a researcher have affected or not the data that you gather, how the participants in the study have affected the data. So that's why it's so important to have a well-developed and connected chapter 1 in which all the elements, problem, purpose, research questions, methodology, and theories are fit together, okay? All right. Next one, the wood gun. Research questions or objective. Research questions clarify what your research study tries to achieve and derive from its problem and purpose. Since they define what you want to answer or test, they are a key element to the whole research process. You have to take them into account when you need to decide what to read, what methods should be used in order to answer it, what data should be gathered, and how to analyze and interpret them. In fact, findings must be presented in a way that the answer to the research questions are clear. And that's something that we are going to expand when we talk about chapter 4, when we talk about how to develop and present findings. But that's the easiest and more precise way of presenting your results when you do it following each research question. This is my first question and these are the findings. This is my second question and these are the findings that answer that question. In fact, therefore, be consistent in the wording of the research question throughout the whole research process, especially when writing the dissertation. And this is very, very important. Your research question must be worded in the same way in chapter 1, in chapter 2, in chapter 3, in chapter 4, in chapter 5. The same wording. Don't be creative. I'm going to talk about that again, but don't be creative with your research question once you have defined and formulated them. Brahat says, can we think of research questions and translations of problem statement into the language of your methodology? Not quite. I mean, research questions can be translated into what you need to know in order to address the problem. Okay? For instance, if you look at somebody that is limping while walking, that's the problem, right? But the question is, what caused that person to be limping? Okay? And when you answer that question, then you can help that person to overcome the problem. You see? Is it clear, Prahato? If not, I can find another examples and another way of answer it. And if you reminded me at the end of the presentation, okay? So, the elements that are usually included in a good research questions are what, who, when, where, because that implies description of elements. How, because it implies process. Why, because it implies causes. And what is intended to do, because it implies focus. In other words, you want to describe, explore, compare, explain, or evaluate. Okay, Adrian is saying that rewording one's research questions can be risky because of the subtle differences hidden in between the lines. You know, if you change language, you can change meaning. So you must be a very expert in language in order to change words without changing meaning. So why are you going to take such risk? No, you don't have to take such a risk. Just say it exactly. Okay, and so, however, I have to point out that not all these elements that I have already mentioned, what, who, where, how, why, what is intended to do, not all of these elements have to be included in each research question. It depends on the nature of what needs to be answered. For instance, a research question that intends to describe the current situation that is studied may focus on the what, who, when, and where involved in it, and in that way describe the situation. A research question that is focused on exploring a situation may also include the how, to know the process associated, while a question that intends to explain will include the why of the situation. So the nature of what you intend to do in order to answer the question should be explicit, or at least it can be inferred easily. For example, describe implies to get a picture of what is going on, usually in the absence of sufficient information. Explore implies no information about the exact scope of what you will work with. In that sense, unexpected information is a possible outcome, and unexpected information too. So, compare is focused on establishing differences and similarities among individuals of groups. Unexplained begins with a description but includes relationship, especially cause-effect among variables. Adrian says, I find the point that each research question should address a specific aspect of the research problem, such an inspiration as I put together my results chapter. I know, because your problem is very, very complex to dissect. Yes, if you focus each research question in one aspect of the problem, when you can gather data specifically to that aspect, and then you can discuss it better. And I'm going to talk about that just in some minutes when I give you some highlights about how to develop each one of these elements. And then chapter 1 includes a succinct presentation of the main methodological elements of your study. The intention is to provide a first picture of how you approach the research process in order to let readers know and also evaluate your decision. So, you usually are asked to describe the selected research design, discuss its appropriateness for studying the research problem and answer the research question, and briefly describe the target population, the sampling method for the study, the data collection procedures, and the instruments or sources of data needed to answer the research question. But all of that information in chapter 1 is provided very succinctly. And this slide presents other elements that may be included in chapter 1 in accordance to requirements established by the university or advisor. Now, in the following 2 slides, I'm going to talk about some of the mistakes that students do when developing or writing the introductory chapter of their dissertations. I'm presenting them so you will be able to avoid them, okay? That's the path that you should not go through. Here you have. Broadly speaking, I want to point out that you need to follow some guidelines in order to avoid these weaknesses, and I will focus on them in next slides. Luz Maria says, methodological elements can be in a block diagram or net chart, or should it be in written form? That depends on what your advisor decides. Because it's just a matter of presenting the information, but some of your universities have specific requirements to do that, and some advisors prefer the written format, but despite the fact that you decided and you are approved to use charts and that kind of thing, you have to include at least a short explanation of what you are presenting, just short one. So let's focus on the background element. So in the background section, you only discuss the main and most relevant aspects of studies related to yours. Okay? So do not elaborate on them, as this should be done in the literature review section. The background section may discuss previous studies in a chronological manner to accentuate the progress in the field and the missing points that need to be addressed. That's an option, but it's a very useful option, okay? But it could be done in another way too. It should be written as a summary of your interpretation of previous research and what your study proposes to accomplish. And this is very important. It's not just a summary of what of putting together direct quotations of the sources that you have read. No. You have to do critical analysis and presenting them as your interpretation, not only of those studies, but also of the relationship of those studies to yours. Focus on including all the important information, but write concisely. Write in a way that creates a story around the central theme of your research. And this is an interesting hint, because if you are discussing a specific problem, then create the whole story about that specific problem. In other words, all what you write should be related to that problem. Okay? And keep in mind that the reader does not know your research intimately. So don't leave things in your mind and pretend or expect that your readers will be able to imagine what you have in your mind. No, my dear, you have to be explicit. Focus on the main aspects of the topic and research problem, and organize your discussion carefully so the development of a study that leads to yours is clear. Your problem statement, in order to avoid the weaknesses presented in the slide, needs to first be clearly stated. You have to say directly and precisely what you think should be studied in order to deal with a problematic situation successfully. It should not be interpreted in more than one sense. That's what you have to state clearly, precisely what you are talking about. Then it has to be focused. In other words, it is clear what specific aspects of the problem interest you, and it states the who, what, why, where, when of the situation. Knowing what aspect of a problem really interests you helps you delimit the scope of the study, not too broad or too narrow. Formulate research questions and also identify the variables involved. Your problem statement should also include a compelling statement. Usually the first sentence of the problem statement should catch readers' attention and interest so they can want to read on. It means you need to indicate what the focus of your study is just from the first sentence. It should also include a synthesis of prior research. You should link your problem statement to important literature that backs up and solidify the identified need as a problem. It has to be it has to be unambiguous. You have to state the purpose of this research clearly. What you intend to do should be explained in unambiguous terms. It also has to summarize the theoretical foundation of the study. The theories, models, or approaches to which your study is related should be stated so anyone can know the theoretical principles on which you base your work. And it should be unbiased. If you already propose the cause of the research problem or its solution, then you are eliminating other possibilities without even considering them. And your study is focused only on proving your point of view. So it's not worth studying that problem, and it's not worth to do your study because you already know what you want to know. Come on. What you want to do is to know what is actually happening. Then, to avoid those weaknesses in relation to the purpose, it has to be clearly stated that in such a way that everybody can be sure of what you intend to do in it. Besides, the goal of your study must be achievable according to the state of the art, your knowledge and ability, and resources available. So if you cannot state a purpose that you don't have the resources to achieve it, because it is too innovative, that you don't have the technology to do it, or you don't have the background to do that, or other things. And of course, it must not suggest a specific expected outcome as the goal to achieve. In the same terms that you cannot pre-say, I don't know, or foresee and state that that's the only option that you are going to find out. Your theoretical conceptual framework must present all the theories you will use to understand, explain, or predict outcomes of the research problem, but the discussion should be restricted to their general aspects, not details. You should avoid theories that are interesting but not intimately related to the research problem. So that's something that happens very common, that the students get so excited about other theories that included it into the theoretical framework, but they are not related to the problem. So what are they doing there? Now, the rest of the elements are: the significance of your study should be stated in terms of its contribution to the field of a study and or the target population. If the importance of a study, the problematic situation is not discussed, then research process becomes a merely exercise to satisfy the researcher's desire. Link the discussion of the study's significance to the identified gap of information. That's the most direct way of justifying your work and avoiding these weaknesses. Now, when formulating the research question, avoid wordings that make what you expect the only possible answer. For example, you formulate your research question in this way: how bad is the teaching strategy applied in X school to teach minority? How bad? Instead of asking how is the teaching strategy used in X school to teach minorities perceived, for instance. No, if you worded it in the first way, how bad is the teacher applied, you are already saying what you expect to find out, and also you are being biased. Do not use ambiguous words or sentence structures that do not provide a clear idea of what you're asking or are beyond the comprehension of your target respondent. If you formulate your research question in such a way that the participants are not going to understand what they are being asked, then you will be on problem. Do not include 2 or more questions in your research question, you cannot get one answer to it. Instead, provide as many questions as needed. For example, instead of asking this question, what teaching strategy improves students' achievement in the S test and what hinders their satisfaction? Divided it into 2 questions, and you will gather more valid and easy to analyze data. So you ask one question, what teaching strategy improves students' achievement in the S test? Another question, what hinders the student's satisfaction? 2 questions. Avoid irrelevant questions. What are irrelevant questions? Those that do not look for information that expand current knowledge or are not based on a strong theory. So why do you have to ask a question that everybody knows the answer? Because it has been studied before, it has been found strong findings to support or to answer it. And here, I say what Adrian have pointed out before. Keep the same wording throughout the whole dissertation. Some people think, oh, that's boring. No, it's not boring because you are not writing an entertaining text. You are not writing a novel. You are writing an academic text designed to convince people of the validity of what you have done. Writing consistently not only facilitates the understanding process, but also improves its clarity and therefore its acceptance. Doing the opposite fosters confusion and the perception that you don't know what you're doing or what you want. And methodological choices are, as opposed to what many people think, independent of the researcher's preferences. You shouldn't select a research design or sample or procedure just because you feel comfortable or like it. The first criterion to make methodological decisions is that they are appropriate to gather valid data to study the research problem and achieve the established purpose. Be sure that the way you implement your study satisfies the research design's demands and that the instruments chosen or built have been evaluated in terms of their validity, adequacy to the characteristic of the population, reliability if you are doing quantitative study, etc. You have to prove that your or let's say you have to test your instrument and then prove that they are really gathering what they are supposed to gather. If you don't do that, then data will not be valid, will be useless. Okay, now it's time to talk about how you can approach the task of developing chapter 1 of your dissertation. Of course, the guidelines I will provide are just some of the many options available. But they can be an initial set to evaluate which one address your cognitive and learning styles and your university or advisor's requirements. Luz Maria says, I already answered that. Okay, here you have a simple flow chart of the process you may follow to develop the first chapter of your dissertation. However, please be aware that the stages may not be in a linear sequence and that in fact, they mostly tend to fit each other and therefore the process is much more interactive than this representation suggests. What is suggested is that the identification of research problem and its statement derives from your analysis of the background information and theoretical framework. What you intend to do in your study is defined by the nature of the research problem and the identified gap of information. From the problem and the purpose, you derive the research questions whose answers will help you achieve the purpose. Also, that in order to answer the research questions, you have to make some methodological decisions that assure the gathered data is valid enough to answer the questions. Such process is not linear. In fact, many interactions are created among the mentioned elements. So a change in one affects the others, and therefore you have to continually check the coherence of the relationship. I have presented it in a linear representation just because as a pedagogical tool, nothing more, okay? And finally, I want to remind you some things that will help you develop and write a high quality chapter 1 and make it the actual lighthouse of your dissertation. Here you have those suggestions. Keep them in your mind and put them into practice. The lighthouse, if you do that, the lighthouse will be as brilliant as needed to guide you even at dark moments. So this is what we have, and I want also to remind you about that good things come by email, at least from us, from Doctora.net, okay? I don't know about other sources, but for us, it's so here you have two things that you can have in order to do things. So question and answer time is open. Let me upload the slides of today, okay? Just a moment. Meanwhile, you can think about what you want to ask or share or whatever you want. What you want to share. There you have, under handouts top is the PDF with all the slides. Anything that you want me to expand or answer or suggest, or just what you want to share? By the way, welcome Tanya and Franco. No questions? Was I so clear? I know that I have told a lot of things, a lot of information, but you will have the recording, and then there you can reflect upon all this information. And if you have any question that you want to ask me later on, you can email me at this or the other one is, the new one is this. Oh, I have another one, but at this moment it's on you. You sent me some requests. Okay, let me answer first to Christy. How do you know when to end the literature review? Choose the best article and then limit those that are less strong? Well, you know when you can, if I'm really honest, you will never be quite sure if you have finished the literature review, but you have to make a decision in those terms. So you stop writing just at the moment that you have presented and discussed all the elements included in all the variables included in the problem, and you have done each one of them in such a way that they are clear enough to understand not only its nature, but also its relationship to your study and to other variables, okay? But I know that usually you say, oh, I have found this new article and it seems to be good to support this point. But the main criterion is that you have, or the main criteria, because it's just more than one, is that you have discussed all the variables and that you have done it in a way that is strong, that is clear, that is supported, and that is related to your study and your purpose. Christy, how do you, sorry, the other one, the other one is choose the best article and then limit those that are less strong. Well, that's part of the first stage of the process. Okay, so you write down, or you make a search in internet and using the main keywords. Then you got too many articles or sources, and then you begin to filter them in terms of what you are really interested in terms of the specific aspect of the problem that you are studying, okay? And then you refine them according to the date of publication, because you are expected to use recent sources, unless those sources are what is called seminal. In other words, sources that were disruptive at some moment and are so important that you have to take it into account. Okay. Cyrus asks, can you suggest an opening section approach for a non-traditional dissertation 3-essay format? Okay, so the dissertation is it has to be developed into 3 essays. Is it correct? If it is so, well, your opening section should be general enough, comprehensive enough to prepare the reader to the idea that your dissertation is presented or is developing in a non-traditional dissertation, because it has this number of parts, or it has been done one part first, one essay first, and then after some time another one, and then another one. But you have to say, to tell the reader that that's the way that you are going to present it. And yeah, as important as that, you also have to connect the 3 parts. If you do not connect them, then you don't have a dissertation. You have 3 different papers, okay? Okay, is the abstract part of chapter 1? No. The abstract is an independent part of the dissertation and has nothing to do with chapter 1. Specifically because the abstract summarizes the whole dissertation. It says from when you began the journey and what you do, what you find, everything is there. So it's not part of chapter 1. Melinda said, yes. I don't know. I hope that yes is that I have been awesome doing what I'm doing. No, just let me know. Then Luz Maria says, would you have a workshop on how to write a good abstract, or is there one online already? Okay, that's a good idea. I think we can prepare something in those terms in relation to writing abstract. Let me write it down. And it also could be how to write not only abstracts, but other parts of the dissertation that are not in relation to, that are not part of the other of the 5 chapters. That could be a good idea. Or we can do something short, a kind of video or something like that. Let me think about that, okay? I have already written it. And with a big thing that said, think about this. All right. Now, is it traditional to have an abstract for a dissertation? Well, it's not traditional, it's required. And it's required because that's the part of your dissertation that is included first in the databases that other researchers consult, and also in the databases of journals and so on. So, because it summarizes your whole dissertation. So it's not a matter of being traditional, it's a matter of being required. Okay, let me see that I was, I'm going to stop the recording, but we can continue here, okay? So everybody, thanks for registering in this webinar. The next one will be about chapter 2. And I hope you have, first of all, that you have liked this, and also that it could be useful for you. And in that sense, that you can, that it has fostered you to register for the next one. And a special thanks for the people who are here right now, to the attendees. I'm very grateful. Bye-bye. Okay.